Good afternoon. Let's go with the last roundtable. The good news is that we are not going to address the easiest topic of the day. We have been talking about difficult topics like responsibility and others, and now we are going to talk about the easiest. Remember that Spanish people and Italian people love irony, so I am using ironia. Governance. 1 week ago, I was participating in a roundtable in Madrid, in a big hospital, Ramón y Cajal. People from different perspectives, different professions, and at the end, all of us, we concluded that the main topic related to, in that case, was secondary use of health data. But we were talking also about artificial intelligence in the area of health. All of us concluded that the most difficult topic when we need to address the improvement, development of biotechnology, of technology, is governance. When we talk about governance, we are not talking about government. To govern and governance are two different things. Remember that we have now, at least in Europe, rights, guarantees, principles. We have a lot of things, let's see, to control, to limit in some sense, to think about the improvement of biotechnology and new technologies. But who is going to govern? Who is going to solve the problems that we are addressing? Who is going to manage everything? Perhaps this is the problem. So it's not about limits, rights, context. It's also about the subject, the institution, the individual, the group, who is going to manage all these new situations. So today, or now, we are going to talk about governance, government, public, private sector. And for this topic, we have three wonderful speakers. I am going to introduce themselves when they are going to talk. So I start following the program with the first speaker, Robert Rob Smith. He is a lecturer in Science and Technology Studies at the University of Edinburgh. Originally, he's a biologist, but he shifted to social science from his PhD, and he has been working on social, political, and governance dimension of emerging biotechnologies. He's a co-investigator in several large synthetic biology grants, where he works closely with natural scientists and funding sciences across Europe. So, Robert, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. You have around 10 minutes, perhaps 12, but at the beginning, 10 minutes, and then we will decide.
I hope I'll use 8, but we'll see.
Good.
Famous last words. Yeah, governance, really easy topic. We love irony as well, I guess, in Britain, and optimism as well, so yeah. Thanks for having me. I want to, I guess, just point at a gap that exists between, I think, our hopes for governance and the way that we actually are able to imagine and do it in particularly in emerging biotechnology. So I work on the social and political dimensions of synthetic biology mostly. So across lots of different sites, across funding, across regulation and risk assessment, and in labs as well with scientists. And I'm not an ethicist. I'm a social scientist. I think that needs saying. And I think one of the reasons it's important is because the catchphrase of the field that I work in, science and technology studies, is that the technical is political, because questions of value and questions of politics are embedded into technologies. So humans make choices about how we design and build technologies, about the kinds of knowledge we use to do that all the time, and these are really important to begin to unpack. And at the moment, I'm focusing on attempts to design and build chromosomes or genomes, the whole genomes of organisms from scratch, which is part of a field, I suppose, it's called synthetic genomics. So synthetic genomics, you can, and scientists do, trace this back through the kind of decades, as you can always do with these kinds of fields. But really, I think an inflection point came with Venter Institute's creation of Cynthia. So this was a full synthesis of a mycoplasma genome. They held a press conference to tell everyone about how important it was, and they inscribed quotes into the genome to show how powerful they were. But since then, genome engineering has really expanded. So there's a whole range of organisms that have been worked on, not just microbes, but things including E. coli, mycoplasma, yeast, kind of multicellular and increasingly higher organisms. So including mice, moss. There's a hermaphrodite mole that I've heard of that people are working on. A potato has just been proposed in the UK because we need national icons. And there's also, although it's not particularly well known, a project to synthesize the human genome as well, which has been funded by the Wellcome Trust. So the field, I think, really represents a step change in our ability to engineer living organisms. It's at the moment really easy to design lots of different things and to come up with lots of ideas, but it's quite hard to put it into practice. But if these initiatives do succeed and they do build the capabilities that they expect to do, then you are going to see a real change in the kinds of things that we can do to organisms. And this, I think, on the current trajectory is going to lead to further commodification of life because they're expensive to create these things. It's hard to make them. So people want to patent them. People want to make the money out of them. That's the whole reason to do it. And so there are whole questions of governance that come with this. And these are some of the questions that scientists raise themselves from people that we've been talking to. Perhaps the most prominent one that scientists talk about is why bother funding this at all? Like, what's the point? Why don't we just do something else? Why don't we use CRISPR to do things? What do you not get by funding? So what are the opportunity costs of this? These are huge projects, hundreds of millions of dollars. So what else could we spend that money on? Once you've decided to fund it, you have a question of, well, what organism do we synthesize? So in the UK, we've decided we're going to do the potato. There are lots of other choices that you could be making. This is a really important question, obviously, because we relate to these organisms in different ways. We value them differently. What chromosome do you want to work on? Matters as well, because one of the most immediate things that comes out of this kind of work is not actually any of the applications, but the biological knowledge. So by building, you learn a lot about the chromosome. So if you're working on a particular human chromosome, you gain biological knowledge about the diseases associated with that chromosome. All kinds of other questions. So, what kind of relationships do we create with these organisms? Should they be international collaborations or national ones? What kind of containment do we want? And these kinds of questions sit across all kinds of spaces. And they're questions of governance because they're about who makes decisions, how we make them, and and they have kind of quite significant consequences for the development of the field and the way we govern it as societies. So there's been kind of constant calls for public debate in this area. More broadly, obviously, Ralph started this conference by invoking a load of lofty virtues that we need to kind of go back to and say that these should be things that are publicly shared and that we have a collective responsibility to engage with. But I think that the dominant vision of governance, so the way that we make these decisions and the way we do this, and particularly in this field, actually goes back to one point in time. So it goes back to the 1975 ICEEL conference that was held in California in the wake of public controversy about recombinant DNA techniques. And it was held, the participants of that conference were scientists, there were some journalists, and we've discovered there were some KGB agents as well. And they met, obviously, to debate the safety and the efficacy of recombinant DNA technologies. And in particular, they met to form a consensus that could move beyond a self-imposed moratorium that they placed on research in that field. So this is not a public space. This is a closed, protected environment. Very few people are allowed in it. It happens at a particular point in time. It's not ongoing. So it's a very fixed kind of period. And it remains the model that scientists and developers in this area are thinking with. So in synthetic genomics, there's been talk of a Silomar for genome writing. It's not going to be in a Silomar. The idea was to hold it in a castle in Tuscany, but you know, I guess take your pick. There have been similar meetings held by the Wellcome Trust, closed-door meetings to talk about the ethics of human genome synthesis. And the field also held a very infamous meeting in 2016 to have similar kinds of conversations. So this model really dominates, and I think it's a really limited one. I would love to have a much broader debate, a much more open debate, and to think about more expansive kinds of capabilities that we might build as societies, but as scientists and as researchers, that will provide a kind of thicker and more ongoing discussion. But I think that we haven't really focused on building those kinds of things. And that's what I'd like to talk about for the next, I guess, 45 minutes with you all. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we will have the question at the end. So next will be Laura Palazzani. Laura, I think she doesn't need to be introduced, but I'm going to introduce as an act of education. Laura is professoressa ordinaria de la Università di LUMSA. Laura is a member of the European Group of Ethics of the European Commission. Laura was also member of the IBC, International Bioethics Committee of UNESCO, among other things. So, Laura, the floor is yours. You have 11 minutes because Robert gives you one and another to Andrea. So you have 11 minutes.
Okay, and also because we are friends, so 2 minutes more.
No, it's poor justice. So. Yes.
Thank you very much, above all, for the invitation. I would talk about the governance of emerging technologies. Generally, when you read about emerging technologies, there is a connection to the so-called new technological wave. So we are in front of something different as we compare with the past. That is disruptive. That is generally used as an adjective for these new technologies. Which are the characteristics? Generally speaking, complex, high speed of innovation. They are very unpredictable. They are very uncertain. It's very difficult to assess the benefit risks. And there are blurring lines between medicine, beyond medicine, therapy enhancement, and so on. So I don't want to speak about the specific technologies, but I am talking about gene editing. I'm talking about neuroscience and neurotechnologies. I'm talking about artificial intelligence, robotics, all the new technologies that belong to this new technological wave. Every time there is a mention to the opportunities, a lot of opportunities, but also challenges. So I am an ethicist, and I'm dealing with challenges, not with the opportunities. So the challenges are a lot, and we need to govern these challenges. How to govern? So I want, first of all, to say something about bioethics and biolaw. So we learned some lessons from bioethics and biolaw. We are in a new phase of technological development. And in biolaw, what we missed the opportunity to have an update regulation, because we generally had a technology, we applied the technology, and then we began to think about the ethics of the technology and then to regulate. But it takes a lot of time. And so, in the end, the regulation is obsolete. It's not up to date, and so we need to use another procedures. I want to say something very, very general about the methodology of governance. According to me, now we need interdisciplinarity, as we had also in bioethics, so nothing new, but we need to enlarge the disciplines. So at the beginning of bioethics, we said we need interdisciplinarity between with medicine, biology, ethics, law. Now we need much more. We need informatics, computer science. Samuel said before, I completely agree, biophysics, theoretical biophysics. We need also human and social sciences. Sometimes psychology, sociology was out of a context of interdisciplinary discussion, but it is very important beyond ethics and law. So we need interdisciplinarity, but we need something more, transdisciplinarity. So we need to have an epistemological attitude to work together. I make you an example. Today, I think a physician that is dealing with artificial intelligence needs to work together with a computer scientist because he or she has not enough competencies. So the interdisciplinarity means to work together. The second point is pluralism. We live in a pluralistic society. We have many different ethical perspectives, but we need to dialogue, to have an epistemological attitude, to find some shareable minimum ethics to share. And this is very important. Otherwise, we can find solution to the problem, but if it's only a univoc solution, it cannot be accepted by the other. So we need to dialogue. Dialogue means to listen to the others and to argue our own positions and also to find something to share. The third point, so enlargement of interdisciplinarity, dialogue, pluralistic dialogue, that's very important. The third point is the integration of ethics within technology. So generally in bioethics, we always had a sort of evaluation of technology after the application, as I said before. Now we need ethics evaluation on the ongoing process of technologies. Since the beginning, the design, ethics by design, during the process, ongoing process, till the end of application, also monitoring after the application. So we need a sort of ethics integrated and also tailored ethics. Generally, we talk about tailored medicine, but we need tailored ethics. What does it mean about tailored ethics? We need specialization in ethics. An ethicist cannot be specialized on whatever technologies. We need to specialize on case-by-case technology. And then we need to enlarge the involvement of the stakeholders. So I completely agree with Robert about the public engagement. That's something very underlined today. So not only a dialogue between experts, but also dialogue with society, because society is using the technology, so we need to involve them in the participation. How to involve them, it's a difficult question, but information, education, because raise awareness is always mentioned, raise awareness about these problems, about the pros and cons of technology, so that they can participate to the definition, but also, to me, it's very important, the involvement of politics, because they are the one who govern. And so we can govern, we can decide how to discipline technologies, but then we need to engage politicians and say, we are discussing these problems, and then we need a certain kind of regulation. And I would say also that the approach should be very prudent, as was mentioned in many other talks, critical, but very adaptive and flexible because of the continuous changes of the technology. So we need to adapt also the ethical reflection. So it's very difficult to find principles, as Bishop the Childress did many, many years ago. 4 principles. We said, as Roberto said before, they are very general, they can be applicable to everything, but we need to elaborate a little bit better which principles, and above all, technology by technology, because it depends. If we are talking gene genetics, we need some kind of principles. If we are talking about neuroscience, neurotechnologies, others, or artificial intelligence or robotics. So we need to think about the principles to be applied in the specific field. I am a little bit optimistic because I found out that when we discuss about emerging technologies, the human dignity comes back. So if you see the AI Act, human-centric approaches written in the Act, and that's very important. So the human dignity is recognized. So maybe because we fear emerging technologies, so we go back to the principle of human dignity. But last point is the role of ethics committees is very, very important on two different levels. On a very general level, so national level, regional, continental level, global level, international level. So experts discussing together, dialoguing together in order to inform society and to recommend to governments how to regulate, how to govern these new technologies. We have a lot of reports, opinions of these committees that are, to me, very, very important. But I think the example of WHO is not, I don't say that because Andreas is here, but because I think really it's something very important WHO did. It's not a permanent committee dealing with all kinds of technologies, but advisory bodies specialized in specific field. And that is much more important to me. It is temporary, but it is focused on the specific technologies. And then I think it's very important the role of ethics committees at a local level. I mean, in the Center for Research, in the hospital doing research, and so on. And we have a model that is the ethics committees of trials, pharmacological trials, and the ethics committees of clinical practice that are good models. But now we need something that is similar but also different. We cannot, I think it would be a big mistake to use them also to deal with emerging technologies because the competencies are different. So we need specialized ethical committees in local, and we need above all training of members for ethics committees because of the specialized topics and issues. So we need a lot of education, I think, for experts also and for citizens. That's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think that Laura has underlined one topic, important topic, and is what will be the future role of bioethical committees in this context, because we need to remember that we have developed bioethics based on committees. In Spain, we call bioética colegial. So there is a direct relationship between bioethics and the committees, and I think this is the reason is because United States developed this idea and it was spread all over the world. So this is, I think, important question also. What will be, considering governance, what will be the position of the future role of our current committees, if we need to change them or we need to improve them or something like this. Okay. Now we go to the last speaker, last but not least, Andreas Reis. As Laura has said, he is No, you can sit. No, Andrea, sorry, Andrea is going to leave. You can go there and you can leave. He is a co-unit head of it's like a game that we have 3 chairs for people, so we are playing. The one who goes is losing the chair. So Andrea is co-unit head of the Health Ethics and Governance Unit of WHO, medical doctor by training, but with a postgraduate degree in biomedical ethics. He's also adjunct professor at the University of Erlangen and Nuremberg in Germany, and his work is focused on public health ethics, research ethics, and ethics of new technologies. And I know that he speaks a great Spanish language also. Okay, Andreas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Federico, for this kind introduction. And also a great thanks to the organizers of this excellent meeting for inviting me and WHO to make an intervention at this conference. So I think we're all aware that clinical care, research, public health are all being revolutionized by the new biotechnologies, like AI, genome editing, but also neurotechnologies. For the last few years, we have also seen an important convergence of all these technologies. So it becomes increasingly, difficult to actually separate them out. For example, with the support of AI techniques, patterns in complex genomic data sets can be identified. And they can help with the discovery of gene functions, regulatory elements, and various variations linked to diseases. In addition, AI-driven approaches can now be used in developing personalized medicine, where they aid in the development of tailored therapies based on the individual genetic makeup. Additionally, AI-driven tools are instrumental and are actually revolutionizing the way we're doing R&D, research and development of drugs, by, for example, identifying potential targets and also by streamlining clinical trials. So while on the one hand, as we've heard, these advances lead to potential enormous benefits, of course, there are lots of ethical challenges and human rights concerns, including, and this is really important for WHO, the equitable access to all of these technologies, which are potentially quite costly, data privacy concerns, and then I think, as we have heard this morning, they touch on the very notion of our concept of human life. So ethical oversight and governance are, really badly needed, and they should happen at various levels. At the global level, we have seen various initiatives that are promoting governance. So at the UN, for example, the Secretary General in October of last year established a high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence, which just 2 months ago in September released their final report, Governing AI for Humanity. Our sister agency, UNESCO, which has been mentioned, has for a long time established ethical standards and human rights standards in the area of genetics and genomics, and has also now been working for years on AI and neurotechnology. At WHO, we have, we're first and foremost a public health agency. So for many decades, WHO's work has really focused on public health and research for health. But novel biotechnologies, and including their ethical aspects, have been a new focus of WHO's 5-year work plan since 2019. And in that year, WHO actually established a dedicated expert group on human genome editing and also a dedicated expert group on ethics and governance of AI. Both expert groups have issued several guidance documents, and more recently, WHO has also started to work on neurotechnologies, mostly the technical issues in collaboration with our mental health department, but this includes also the ethical, legal, and social aspects. In 2023, just last year, WHO also established a technical advisory group on genomics, which provides technical guidance to WHO and works on questions like access, priority activities, and also including the ELSI issues. So this is a sort of a short picture of what's happening at the global level. But governance could also happen at a more regional level. In Europe, to start here, of course, all of you will know the Oviedo Convention, which has a very important article about genome editing. More recently, the European Union published the AI Act, but it's not only in Europe that we have these regional efforts at governance. We have, for example, the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, which also just a few months ago published regional guidance on the governance of AI, and also the African Union, which with which we are a lot working, published a continental artificial intelligence strategy in August 24. At the national level, regulatory agencies of some countries play an important role in regulating these new technologies. At the same time, many of these regulatory agencies, particularly in lower and middle income countries, are very ill-equipped and have a lack of expertise to adequately address the risks and benefits of these new technologies for their populations. Also at the national level, we shouldn't forget the national ethics committees, which are really multiplying. I think about 30 years ago we had about 10. We are now at about 80 countries that have national ethics committees, and they're often advising their governments on national regulation. And in some countries, like in France or also in Singapore or in Greece, they have even set up special subcommittees or even specialized committees on the ethics of new technologies. At the institutional level, finally, institutions where research on life science takes place and where these novel technologies are used in humans, they can and should play an important role in the oversight at the local level. As we just heard from Professor Palazzani, and I totally agree with her, research ethics committees can play a crucial role in overseeing scientific projects that aim to test new biotechnologies with human participants. In addition, once these technologies have been developed, clinical ethics committees could oversee the use of these technologies in humans in very specific patients. And of course, there is a big role for public engagement. We have seen a big gap, for example, in digital literacy, but the same goes, of course, or is true for genomics and genome editing. These topics are very difficult, and I think even many academic experts grapple with these technologies and really understand what the issues are. So I would agree that we need to do a much better job in facilitating public dialogue and citizen engagement. So in conclusion, for now, there are many levels at which governance of novel technologies can be implemented, but these efforts are at the same time complicated by the unprecedented speed of development. I have been with WHO for many years and working probably about on, 20 or 30 different topics in ethics. But I can tell you, I've never seen anything that is moving so quickly as, for example, AI. Just to give you an example, when we published our document on ethics and generative AI, there was a chapter arguing, why there was a problem because the ChatGPT was only using data that had a cutoff date the year before. Just before we wanted to publish, they've published a new version where actually now it was integrating new data as well. So we had to, so the guidance was almost outdated before we even could put it out. And this is really enormous for policymakers, not only at the international but also at the national level, to keep pace with these developments, and also with the extraordinary power of these technology companies. We have an oligopoly basically of very few companies where the knowledge and also the finances are concentrated, and this is really a challenge for the public sector to keep up here. So I'm an optimist by nature, and without wanting to sound too pessimistic, it seems like the current international context is not very favorable for global governance. Whether we look at the negotiations about climate change or about WHO's international agreement on pandemic prevention and preparedness, which the member states are still negotiating, or the current wars and conflicts, countries at the moment often do not seem to be able to reach agreements that are equitable, that can be effectively implemented, and are legally binding. This is why the role of lower level governance mechanisms, I would argue, is even more important, both at the institutional level of health research and provision and at the national and regional levels. Various governance options should be implemented at these levels. And with that, thanks for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Andreas, you have a chair. You can get the chair right there.
If you wish, you can stay here, which is much more comfortable.
No, but we can move the chair to the front.
It's very comfortable.
No, okay, now we have 30 minutes for questions, so to discuss.
I'm going to start with a brief comment. You know very well that we are challenged with so many rules that add up to the things that we're facing with research activities. And this is not only for new technologies, but also for traditional research, I would say. One of the things that I would badly missing is the setting that we are today, actually. We never have the possibility to have, by design, by the very first second of our research projects, an environment with so many disciplines represented. And what happens most of the times is that the multidisciplinarity come at the very last second in the process, which adds a lot of complexity, because actually all things that have been done before cannot be changed very easily. And at the same time, the language that different people speak is sometimes different. So I expect some discussion about governance will offer the opportunity to think of practical solutions for addressing this very important issue. Because, for example, the addition of many concerns about ethics for new technologies like AI slowed down a lot of research activities, not only in this institution, not only in this hospital, but I think in many other countries. So the point is, how can we get better from this point with your expertise and your suggestions? Provocation. Laura.
May I? So I'm an ethicist and not a scientist, but I should say that artificial intelligence is a good example in which this point emerges in a very evident way. We are discussing now in my little group of research, where also Alberto is involved, of course, cannot be like that. And so we are discussing about a guidelines for physicians to apply in healthcare AI. And the concept that seems very abstract, human in the loop, that is continually repeated. How do we exactly think, what is the meaning of human in the loop? It means in the loop of all the process since the beginning. So it means we need to think about an equipe of people. The physicians should not be alone. The only possibility is that is a physician with competence in data science, with ethics and legal, but it is not possible. So we need people working together since the beginning. So not always, not all the time, but with meetings, regular meetings. That's why in our guidelines, we will try to improve this concept in the concrete application. So human in the loop, it means in every process. And first of all, we need to try to make scientists understand that ethics is not censorship. That is the feeling of scientists, unluckily. But it's a way to improve research and technology, not a way to obstacle technology. So that is something we need to educate also scientists on this concept to work together, and I think it's very important.
But this has a very important organizational implication.
It's organizational, and also, I need to say, also cost.
Exactly.
That is the other problem, because of course you need to pay people to work together in very different, but in some specific areas, I think it's necessary. So I don't know how to manage them. I'm not an economist, unlikely, but we need to find ways to do that in order to have a positive impact of the technology.
And remember that to keep human in the loop means human contact, not human supervision. Yeah. And the Artificial Intelligence Act talks about human supervision, which is perhaps ex post evaluation, no contact.
Exactly.
So with this idea, the physician will disappear or will be at the end without the patient in front, trying to check the results from the artificial intelligence. And this is a big problem. So we have more. Do you have any?
So I completely agree with you. And I think one of my concerns, but actually I agree with you about this as well, is about the cost implications of proposing that we have ethics or STS or something everywhere. And I think there's a bit of a way of thinking about this within funding organizations, which is irritating to me as someone who advocates for it as well, which is that every single project they fund should have some kind of embedded person working as part of it. And the project is the right mode or place for doing this kind of work. And I think that's not the case. I think the most important thing is to have spaces for responsible innovation, for want of a better word, for reflection and debate, spaces like this, but spaces within universities and research institutes. And that for those to be kind of core capacities that are centrally funded in the same kind of way that a proteomics facility is a centrally funded structure within the university. And I think if you do that, what you'll see are things that have happened in the UK amongst the synthetic biology community, which is that we now have a set of researchers who have grown up in their academic lives where it is normal to talk with social scientists and ethicists and to be thinking about this kind of stuff. And it changes the nature of the field. It's very hard to say, oh, we now have this kind of technology that is now objectively responsible or ethical that it wouldn't have been. But the way that they work and the way they think and the way they talk is qualitatively different to the generation that came before them. And it comes from this continued willingness to have a conversation.
Thank you. Just to add, so first of all, the research ethics review committees are being always, they're probably one of the most unliked institutions in any hospital or research institution, and they're always blamed around the world for delaying things, and sometimes rightly so. But the problem often is that they're not very well equipped, neither financially nor in staff. But I think these new technologies also pose very particular, very difficult questions. And I remember being on a podium last year in Saudi Arabia, which is investing immense money on AI, and a researcher accusing the research ethics committees, basically in coming back with questions which are very ill-informed, and they said they have no idea what they're talking about. They're blocking our research. And can WHO please develop some guidance for research ethics committees on how to review AI-based research? And then there were many other requests like that. So actually, that is one thing we're doing now, developing guidance for research ethics committees on how to review AI-related research. But I wanted to mention a second guidance document by CEOMS, actually, which many of you will know through the research ethics guidance. They last year put out an international guidelines on good governance practice for research institutions, and I think this goes really to your question. So I think we need to also make the research institutions much more responsible. They have been somehow a bit neglected, I think, as players. We are talking to researchers. We are speaking a lot about research ethics committees, but the institutions themselves have important role in ethical standards, in oversight of research, and they need to, for example, take care that their ethics committees are appropriately funded, that there are declaration of interest and management of interests, of conflicts of interest policies in place, and so forth. So I can highly recommend that for any research institution. Thank you.
So kind of to build off some of the ideas you said there, I've got two somewhat conflicting but related questions and comments here. The first is, how do you create expertise both in developing countries? One of you mentioned the lack of institutional expertise, as well as among the public. such that people are able to make decisions that are reasonable, but they're not just paternalistic ideas being pushed down from like the European powers. And they're also honest to local values. And the second question is, how can governance institutions best retain and recruit talent kind of in the face of the vast money available to private industry that they're supposed to be trying to regulate and guide?
Yeah, thank you. Very difficult questions. So the second one, I'll start with the retaining talent question. I think that is indeed a big challenge. I work a lot with one professor on AI, and he said he loves his work, but it's always shocking to see that every one of his PhD students, when he leaves, they earn the double as he does. So, and it's of course, you know, a big challenge. As I said before, the technology companies have a lot of power and of course a lot of resources and very good salaries. But I think it's important for the public sector to, you know, offer good conditions, frankly, and maybe to open up a bit their, you know, often maybe very frozen schemes there. To retain talent, and also I think they should be able to somehow motivate through their, you know, through their mission. Somehow I still believe there are some people who are not completely profit driven, and they should be attracted by you know, public sector positions. How to do public engagement? Again, I think we need more specialists in this area. We've seen also in COVID that actually there's a new profession that has arisen. You know, we have all these infodemics that we dealt with. At WHO, actually, there's a new department on infodemic management now. They have even established a journal, Infodemiology. You know, so I think in this area, similarly, we need specialists on how to properly communicate the risks and benefits of these new technologies. And at WHO, we have, you know, risk communication specialists, for example, but there needs to be certainly more people educated on how to do this. I'm not one of them, but anyway.
Yeah, just quickly, I mean, it's completely possible to have really good, thick, rich public discussion and public engagement around emerging technologies. It's been happening in the UK in a very particular way, but professionalized for 20 years now. I think the challenge is actually kind of the opposite, that it's hard to create organizations that are able to listen to the outcomes of those events. So often they don't want to hear what people have to say, because then you have to do something about it. So for instance, in the UK, we had a public dialogue on genetic technologies. One of the outcomes was we're happy to accept more risk if you really work to ensure that you are going to enable equitable access and actual meaningful public benefits. If you're going to take that seriously, you have to think about ownership and patenting and IP, and a government in the UK doesn't want to do that. So you have this kind of challenge there. I think the other three things are about funding, which is really disappointing. We need more public funding. There's lots of public attitude surveys that show that publicly funded scientists are seen as honest brokers and sources of trustworthy information. That should be recognized and compensated properly for the role it plays within wider public debate in societies, I think.
Yes, about the public debate, I think it could be good to mention the example of France, for example, that organize public debate regularly. And we need, it is expensive to organize in a very good way a public debate, because you need people, experts to communicate, to involve people, and then a systematic organization. It's not like one conference once each week. It means to regularly create a sort of ethical space of discussion in society in order to raise awareness. And also, we need to rethink education in a certain way. So since the school year to have a specific a slot dedicated to the ethics of science and technology, so developing what is called health literacy, ethics literacy, new digital literacy, and so on. And that is one point. The second is about the problem of public and private is a very big problem. I don't have a solution, but I think we have also precedents in the pharmaceutical companies that are very powerful, very rich, and in a certain way, the governance of pharmaceutical companies is difficult to manage, but we have some regulations. So finally, if we need, we could think about regulation as a form of governance. If you think about AI Act, is a regulation, continental, not global. It's very difficult to reach a global regulation, but it's continental with some prohibitions, with bans, and the private companies, very richful and powerful, need to, they are obliged to respect this restriction, at least in Europe, and probably the most optimistic think about the Brussels effect, and maybe all other countries and continents could follow the example of Brussels. Let's see what will happen, but maybe we can reach some results also in that area. But I think now the biggest role is about education. I think it's very important, information and education.
Perhaps one of the problems that we have developed, for example, if we consider drugs, medicines, we have developed a system based on clinical trials paid by private companies but developed in public hospitals. And I feel that I am not saying something against the private sector, this is not about this, but perhaps in the area of artificial intelligence, we are going to have the same. Artificial intelligence in the hands of the private sector, but develop, test in the public sphere. This is my feeling in the area of health. So this is, for me, it's a problem because we are not talking about governance between public and private sector. We are talking about something different. To separate subject, the private, public. So, more questions?
Yes, sorry. Just a comment. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think you will be happy to know that you already opened your debate, because I'm representative of civil society, rare diseases patient organizations, and we know you very well. And just because you were mentioning several times the need to open the debate. You never, I'm sorry, mentioned
patients.
Patients. And when we talk about patients, I don't like the term patients. In my case, it's people living with a rare disease, which is quite long. But while talking about engagement, we are talking about people, population, and it's civil society voting. So even for the politicians, it's important that this debate, it's obviously made with the engagement of patient organizations, representatives, because we are, and I'm spoiling my speech of tomorrow. Yeah, this is my point. And because we are the responsible, going back to the earlier session on responsibility, we are responsible to make heard the voice of people who cannot speak loud enough to be heard. But we deem that it is equally important to open to the civil society, to the population. And just an example, we started initially with a project, a regional project on genetic newborn screening. So we had, this is a small example actually, we gathered Catholic organizations, or mothers already attending courses for prenatal courses. We started with the small ones, but this is how you really get the sense and you are able to give a meaningful explanation of what it is. Then obviously we are talking larger scale, and I can go back to what it's called, it's known to be play to decide. It's a sort of game that we played at the parliament initially about the newborn screening. So there are several ways to engage either with patient organizations and civil society. And I think, but if we are not involved since the beginning, and I go back to the development of orphan medicinal products. This is what we said, early dialogue, unmet needs. So all this process should be based on unmet needs and purpose-driven. This is the right way. It may be also helpful for the ethical issues, because we are very much concerned. We are even ready to risk. Someone was talking about to have courage. Sure, we are brave. Our ratio, rare diseases, I will show you the figures and numbers. It's obvious that for us, but we are also a small population which could be helpful for pilots. So please, we are ready to be engaged. Thank you.
I think
Put a comment.
no, but it's but important comment.
Can I just say maybe?
Yes.
So I wholly agree, and I think one of the success stories has been the increasing institutionalization of patient organizations and patient involvement in health research across Europe. I think one of the challenges is the institutionalization of that involvement in other forms of treatment and other parts of the healthcare system. So I think rare disease organizations have been very successful. I think mental health organizations have had a much harder time. And I think thinking about why this is the case and how things could be different would be really, really significant. I think the other gap is it's striking that it's becoming normalized in places like health and medicine. Is completely not in, if you look at other areas like conservation or food and agriculture. This is not a model which is pursued very normally. And so I would hope that there are lessons that can be taken from this kind of area for other sectors of biotechnology as well.
And also in the ethics committee for clinical trials, at least in Europe, there is a specific role of a lay person that is considered the representative of the patients, of the voice of the patients. That's very good example of the participation in the clinical trials that could be used also for the participation in the emerging technological debate. Because we need not to forget that all the people, citizens, we think about healthy people, we are not all healthy, and we are future patients, so in a certain way, everyone is a patient and a future patient. But in any case, I think that, yes, of course, the inclusion of the organization of patients, very important.
More questions?
Yep. So just quick, thank you very much for the presentations, by the way. One aspect I think that, at least in the United States, and Tim can weigh in on this too, that we've discovered recently is a lot of the biotech companies are interested in being involved in this because there was this thing called GMOs, right? And nobody wants their new technology to end up like the GMOs, right? So there is interest there, and as you said, they have the money. And of course, if you're going to make more money, your product has to become popular. It can't be like the GMOs. So there are ways in which we can engage those. The other side of that, which is interesting in engaging the public, one of the aspects I think we have to make clear at the very beginning is the public may not go the way you want them to, no matter how much you educate them. I mean, Daniel Yankelovich did research on this 20, 30 years ago, right? And in terms of saying you can give them all the information you want, but they may have a whole set of different goals and values than you do as an industry. So that's always a caveat that needs to be addressed, right up front, and just say everybody's in this conversation together, but we recognize the fact that it may not go the way some of the groups would like it to. Thank you.
Yes. And remember something very interesting, that you were talking about United States, and Andrea said that we went from 10 committees to 80. But the first state in the world with a presidential commission doesn't have for the last 8 years. With Trump, the first Trump, we are going to have the second, and Biden. This is interesting. So let's think about the role of a presidential commission in the current context of the development of technology and biotechnology. It's important because you are developing a lot without a committee, and I don't know
It's untenable at the moment.
Yes, I know. Perhaps it's better not to have. No.
Yeah, thanks very much. I wanted to pick up on a point that you made, Robert. So basically, I think you partially addressed already in the discussion, but so I really liked your point about the fact that oftentimes these kind of discussions on new technologies are led in very close spaces, like the ICEEL conference, which is actually taking place again next February, right? So I was wondering, like, when we do science communication to the public outside, right? I was wondering, how do we make sure that we don't just reach the most educated part of the society? I guess patient organizations are also the kind of events that you suggested are examples of this, but I don't think they can be enough, because I mean there is still, like 99% of the formats reach only the educated part of society. My only answer is to catch children in school, like where everybody has to be and nobody can leave, right? But maybe you have thoughts on how to communicate better to the whole population, so to say.
It's like a really simple question, but a really hard question, isn't it? So I think my gut is it depends on what you think the purpose of public engagement is. So and that's going to depend, it's going to vary from country to country. So like I'll just talk from the UK because that's what I know. So, but if you think the purpose of public engagement is to like stimulate debate more widely and create some kind of public discussion, then I guess, yeah, you want a set of information which is broadly accessible. You want to think of as a scientific organization or a funder or something like that as a provider of balanced information, and we know that people treat those kind of non-privately funded organizations quite highly in terms of trust, and that's the kind of work you can do. In that kind of situation, there are already going to be tons of public groups that are talking and are engaging and are doing that work, right? So there is no kind of like mythical public that you're trying to create. There's lots of different groups. So it might be patient organizations. If you're talking about food, it will be growers, farmers, local food cooperatives, people that buy stuff, like everyone eats. And so I suppose like in that kind of sense, you just want to enable those groups to mobilize the kind of discussion they have. But I think a lot of the time when we talk about public engagement, we're talking about bringing knowledge into to the design of a technology or a design of a kind of scientific study, particularly when we're talking about health, right? And if it's patient involvement, there is a representation argument. So, the treatment will affect the person, therefore they should have a say about how it's used, how it's designed, that kind of thing. But there's also a knowledge argument, like if you speak to these people, you'll produce better technologies. And in that kind of sense, then I think it is, there are methods, basically social scientific methods you can do that really map the groups that are involved potentially within that kind of space. I think that the hardest to reach people are often the most marginalized, and they often have very good reasons for not wanting to talk to old established institutions, and that's a much harder question to kind of deal with. I'm not sure how. I'd like to know someone that can do that.
Laura.
Yes, just to mention, there is a very interesting document that was approved by the Steering Committee of Human Rights and in the field of health. This is the new name of the Committee of Bioethics of the Council of Europe, and they issued 2 years ago a guide to public engagement, taking into consideration all the different practices that are very different all over Europe. I mentioned before France, that's a very good example of capacity of organizing public debate, and there are a lot of very interesting reflections. But of course, we need scientists be able to communicate in a lay way, very difficult technical and scientific results, and at the same time, we need communicators, so journalists, being trained in science, so that they can together, the role of media is very important. You remember also in pandemics how was important the role of media in engaging the public about the lockdown and vaccines and everything. So, and also the social media, that's another point, the real problem of also the regulation of social media in the way to inform public about scientific contents. So I think we need to think about this. It's very important.
One last question.
Thank you. I had 2 questions, but I think my one to Robert was pretty much asked and covered there. But in that case, to Andreas, I was wondering, you're talking about the importance of these expert groups and the importance of embedding ethics as well as part of the governance processes and informing governance. But I was wondering, how much power do you think that these groups should have, and how much influence or what kinds of power over decision making and the production of guidance? Like how does that work?
Okay, well, I think there's 2 groups I talked about. So one are the expert groups at the international organizations, and they basically advise the organizations in developing the guidance. In the end, it's very similar with UNESCO or WHO. In the end, the organization, of course, retains the right to basically, reject the advice or modify or whatever. So usually these groups are advising the directors general. And at the national level, we have the national ethics committees, and there's been a lot of discussion about whether they adequately represent the population, or, for example, patient groups or the wider public, and whether there's some committee creep, or as they say. But I think in most countries they are purely advisory as well. So they would often list arguments pro and con certain technologies or certain practices, and then hand these over to the Parliament or the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of Science, and then it would be fed into the policy making process. So I would say, if anything, maybe they have too little power in basically informing policy, and sometimes are not listened enough to in many countries. In other countries, they're actually quite powerful, especially if they're very near the president or the parliament. They can be really, really powerful, as we have seen during COVID, for example. But in interest of time, I think I'll hand it back to our chair.
We have 20 seconds for last.
Burning questions only.
Yes. No comments, not a speech, question.
Just a question. I think the key to it is lobby groups. Someone mentioned GM before. GM was killed by lobby groups. That's really. I was involved in lots of debates and writing articles about it, but it was killed by lobby groups like Greenpeace and Save the Earth, and getting lobby groups on the side of good medical intervention, I think, will be key. If the lobby groups see it in the same way as they saw GM, then it's lost.
So,
that's politics, right?
Not politics.
Next time we should invite some politicians.
Do you want to say something? Yes. Laura wants to talk about lobbies.
No. Just one thing that we need to think there are many movements anti-science.
Yes.
So that's the problem, and Federico is going to write a book about that. And that is also in pandemics, we saw that, and beyond the lobby groups, there are also anti-scientific movements. So that is a big problem. It's very difficult to face, but I think as coming back to the point of the power of a committee, I would not talk about power of the committees because they do not have power. They are at the service of a community in order to discuss and dialogue on specific topics, and they offer their results in order to be used, the results for the possible regulation. That is, it is a real work and service. And I just make you an example of the impact. For example, there is in Europe the high-level group of ethics on artificial intelligence that was set up by the European Commission, and the opinion of that high-level group was mentioned at the beginning in the Consideranda of AI Act. It means it had an impact, an influence in the drafting of the AI Act, and it's something good. And also the European Group on Ethics wrote a statement. Yes. So I think they are all. I think it's a very good job of the committees because they work together on specific topic with a lot of discussion. We experienced this committee, so it takes a lot to discuss about these topics. But in the end, the opinions are a very good state of the art of the interdisciplinary pluralistic dialogue, and then recommend to the governments the way to regulate. But then the governments are autonomous in the regulations. Sometimes they have impact, sometimes not. Unluckily, but
okay,
it's life.
So let's finish. Committees are important. Patient organizations are important, parliaments are important, everything is important, but someone has said a very important word, which is schools. I think schools are going to play a main role in this context, but politics, are our politicians able to reach an agreement about the topics that there need to be talked in the area of bioethics? And this is one problem, but we are going to finish with one book. In his book, La Era Digital, in Spanish language, Paolo Benanti seems quite pessimistic about the future, but at least he thinks that there is a hope, and the hope is develop literacy for young people and children. Remember that I am old people, we have term of comparison between analogic and digital world. And this is important to understand that there is not only digital work, but our young and children, they don't have this term of comparison. And this is very important to let them know that there is something different from technology. There is music, there are paintings, there are trees, because sometimes the mobile is not able to let you see the trees. This is a big problem. Thank you very much.